Hello everyone, it's about time I gave you guys another update on what's going on with my Class A Deck Championship Series. So today I'm going to talk about the final qualifier and the start of the championship itself. So I haven't been as good about making videos or streaming recently, mostly because I've been healing, getting out of the back brace, getting back to the point where I'm starting to work up how much normal activity I can do. So in the process, like, my mind is on walking farther and being able to do a few more one-footed calf raises or stuff like that as I try to get back to the point where I can do more and more of my normal activities. So that's sort of, ironically, each time I've had something where I've gotten suddenly a bit better with this broken back, I've ended up dropping out of some of my smash up stuff for a little bit because I immediately started focusing more on physical healing stuff. But it's time for me to do some smash up updating. So Qualifier 8 was the final qualifier. It was huge and bloated because I had all of the decks I originally meant to put in Qualifier 8, plus we had more new Titans that were leaked for 10th anniversary at the time. The Sharks Titan, it's pretty good. You can make an argument that it got released late enough that Sharks may have been screwed out of eventually getting an A rating from me by just me not having enough time to find the right partners for them. But I did try a lot of good partners for them, and so they had a chance to get a couple decks in the championship. So there are a number of decks that I had a lot of interest in, but I'm going to start, as I like to do, with the stuff that went out in round 2. Big Hero 6 with fairies. This was just me trying to get a setup and build up faction, pair it with fairies and the fairies board control. This is an archetype, that combination is an archetype that can work well, but Big Hero 6 is not, in general, that strong a faction overall in 1v1, and fairies used to be fantastic, but because they play control via minus power as a lot of their style, and they don't have a lot of aggressive play, like their aggression consists of enchantment and titania, and that's about it. Yes, Tinks can generate a lot of power for a 2 by moving a daisy chain, but still buffing the 2 just means that a faction does more per turn on average. Buffing the 2 doesn't mean that its burst potential when it goes for a big turn gets that much bigger, because even though you're making a 4 and dropping a -2 off the opponent, and that's 6 total power increase with your minion play, it's still, that's still not really that much bigger than just drop a typical boss minion or something like that. So Big Fairy T, it's a combination that has some synergy, but the pieces aren't good enough in A class. Fairy Ts are a good faction, but they aren't as strong as they were when they were released because they have done a little... They don't do well when the enemies scale too fast. Sinister Zombies, they have synergy, but the pieces themselves aren't that good enough. Zombies are an A-tier faction, but they need the right partner. Sinister, obviously, we love to pair Sinister 6 with factions that have enough power per turn on average to mean that Sinister 6 doesn't start breaking and losing bases. Avengers are a good combination with Sinister 6 and are doing well in Class A. Zombies aren't quite enough to work well with them the same way. Mulan Orcs. Mulan has not been successful in A. Orcs is not aging all that well. Egyptian Dragons. I thought this was going to be a pretty good deck. It sort of depended on how big a difference Sphinx made. Sphinx is a good Titan. It's not a great Titan. Egyptians are not a great 1v1 faction in the first place. They got a good buff. I don't think Egyptians got screwed out of an A rating by being released late. I just think Egyptians has not really hit A with the addition of Sphinx in 1v1. And Dragons, again, Dragons with the right partner is strong. In A-class, Dragons with the wrong partner gets beaten up by everything that deserves A-class. Aladdin Warriors. Warriors not A-class. Warriors aged poorly. Same thing for Wizard Warriors. Kitty Pirates. Kitties are not what they used to be. We're going to see more of that in the championship. It's kind of what happened. Kung Fu Zombies. I gave Kung Fu a lot of try, and Sifu was not leaked in time for this. Now, of the 10th anniversary Titans that got screwed out of a spot, for all I know, it's possible that Kudzu makes plants Class A, but I really just couldn't think of the right things to pair with plants in time, and they were leaked a little late. Sifu, now, I was giving Kung Fu a whole bunch of chances to get in, because I thought, because they can have some good matchups against something like Polynesians, they might be Class A. Kung Fu legitimately might have been screwed out of an A rating by being leaked just a little bit too late, and I'm going to tab over to the championship here. They've got Kung Fu Fairies who, in 1B, their second matchup, are going to get Sifu as a Titan. They've also, where's the other Kung Fu deck? Was there a second Kung Fu deck in the championship? Alright, I think Kung Fu did not get a second deck. Kung Fu had a whole bunch of chances to get in Qualifier 8. I put a whole bunch of Kung Fu decks in here, and without Sifu, they weren't quite good enough, and I think a number of the ones that went out in later rounds, maybe they had a real shot at making it if they had Sifu. So it's possible that Kung Fu should have put some decks into the championship if they had Sifu. Hydra Ninjas, it made the third round in the Marvel bracket. It's synergistic. Ninjas have also gained a Titan. Ninjas are not getting screwed by having their Titan leaked too late for it to make them in qualifiers, because they already have 2 decks in round 2, and I believe those are Ninja's 2 best combinations in Tier A. So those decks are both 2-0 in the championship. Ninjas are likely going to finish exactly the same place in tier where they would have if Invisible Ninja was available all the way back in Qualifier 1. Mostly what we determined with the Ninja decks that did not make the championship is that a lot of random Ninja teams were not really good enough. Ignoble Anansi, there's obvious synergy here. Who did they lose to in round 1? That kind of matters, right? Where's Ignoble Anansi? They lost to Sinister Critters, which is a solid deck, but not a deck that made it through. Werewolf Fairies. Werewolf Fairies had some really nice synergy as a deck when Pretty Pretty Smash Up was new. They have a little less synergy when both have Titans, because the Titans kind of compete with each other for... Like, they both want to be out at the same time. You spend a lot to bring out the Fairy Titan, and that makes it so you don't really want to replace it with Great Wolf Spirit later on. So as a result, you sort of end up playing Werewolf T with Fairies NT a lot of the time. Fairies NT is a lot worse than Fairies T. So that's some of why the deck didn't make it in. Historically, it had been a great deck for synergy at one point. I sort of wanted my deck ratings to reflect the fact that it doesn't have the same synergy anymore due to the double Titan. That's one reason why I put it in here. So, second round, Kitty Trickster. They went 3-3. They are a solid deck. They are one of Kitty's better decks in tier. Kitties are not going to make a, most likely, depending on where I put the bar for A-, I believe they could conceivably make A-, but I am probably going to set the bar so they miss it. This is actually going to be something when I finish the full round 1B of the championship, and I will have 2 options that I have set up ahead of time for what a faction might need to make an A- tiering on my tier list. And I'm kind of going to ask other people for feedback on whether I think the bubble set of factions should all make it or all miss it. And what it is, it's going to be either requiring at least a 1-3 record in these 2 rounds, 2 decks to make it to 1 and 3 in order for a deck to make A-, or 2 decks actually have to make it to round 2 and A, which requires a 2 and 2 record or better. And once I know which factions are in the bubble, that's when I'm going to ask people for feedback on, do you think this set of factions should be an A- or not? But if that set of factions doesn't make A-, then Kitty Trickster will potentially be a really strong deck in B tier, because 3 and 3 in the qualifiers here is pretty good. We know Tricksters are not making A tier, and Kitties probably shouldn't either. Sinister Critters, they're solid, they were just not quite good enough. Avenging Grannies, now, Granny's Titan, it's good. Let's take a look at what it's got in the championships. What do we have here? We've got MOE Granny's T. Have they played their second? They need to win at least 1 of 2 games against Elf Sharks to make round 2. And the other Granny's deck, Big Hero Grannies, spoiler alert, they're already in round 2 of the championship. So with that, Grannies is 1 game away from being guaranteed at least an A- rating. They're a good faction. Avenging Grannies does not have good synergy because the Granny's Titan really likes to work with 3 power minions. Specifically 3s, but it can work with 2s and 3s, and that's because it can play a 3 or less power off the bottom of your deck. So Avenging Grannies has some negative synergy that made it not so fun to play. I'm now going to mention one of the winning decks, because I just talked about the problem with Avenging Grannies. We have the opposite problem with Big Hero Grannies. Big Hero is not great. Big Hero focuses on 3s. Granny's T is therefore able to exploit Big Hero to its greatest potential. And Big Hero Grannies ended up finishing 3rd in this qualifier because of that synergy. I believe the first game I played with them, first or second, where are they? Granny's T, Big Hero. I'll find them eventually. There they are. Yeah, they lost their very first game against Steampunk, and then they won 7 games in a row to beat a 6-0 deck as it came into the final, and then went to the championship, played in the 24v25 seed match against Aladdin Knights, the 2nd place finisher in Qualifier 8, and beat them. So they're now sitting at 2-0 going into the second round, having won 9 games in a row. This is a good deck. It's good because Big Hero abuses the Granny's Titan to the maximum. Lion King and Grimm, 2 solid factions, not enough synergy. And let's take a look at how are Lion Kings looking in the championship field. Where do we have Lion Kings? Lion King Shapeshifters, who got 2-0'd by Vigilante Knights. Where are they? They're 28, and they haven't played their their 1B match. In order to make the second round, they're going to have to 2-0 the Fairy Avengers. Are there any other Lion Kings in here? Hydra Lion King. This deck won. This deck has really good synergy. And that's all I see. So in order for Lion King to make Tier A, they are going to need at least 1 win against the Fairy Avengers, playing with Shapeshifters. Depending on how I set the bar for A-, they might need 2. Lion King is a good faction. I'm not convinced that they have... I don't believe they've been screwed out of an A rating by not having enough chances. I think a lot of Lion King decks are a little bit inconsistent because you really need to get your hands on Mufasa. Wait a minute, where are Lion Kitties? Lion Kitties did some fantastic things where they opened up. I don't see them in there. I'll find this. I want to see where Lion Kitties are. Okay, where are Lion Kitties? Because I know I played that deck. There they are. Okay, Lion Kitties was another good deck. It was not quite enough. Lion Kitties went 5-3. If you get Catfight on Mufasa on turn 1, you're going to win. You're generally going to win the game. And that's a fantastic little synergy to have, but every Lion King deck is inconsistent unless you have a lot of ways to search for Mufasa. I think Lion Kitties has the potential to be a top B tier deck, assuming both Lion King and Kitties don't miss A-. They've got a chance for this to be a scary deck in B tier. All right. Talked about this. Werewolf Sharks. Werewolves are obviously good enough. Sharks are... I don't really think... Like, Sharks are borderline B plus A- with that Titan. They didn't get a full chance, but I don't feel terrible about them missing it if they do miss it. Big Hero Ants. This was an attempt by me to pair up power counters with ants and abuse stuff. It was okay. Shape-shifting Sharks. Another way to get more ways to kill more minions, in this case your own minions. They were okay, they were not good enough. Polynesian Plants. Polynesian Plants, maybe they make the field if Kudzu is available. I don't know. Plants might be missing might be an A- or A faction that just didn't get a chance. But, you know, for all we know, Skeletons could be an A faction. I still haven't gone and bought the 10th anniversary set, and I need to actually go pick it up, because it's literally just a drive down the road that I basically live on to get to Sci-Fi City and go pick it up, because they're the local AG distributor, and people on the Discord have actually been ordering their 10th anniversary sets from Sci-Fi City, because Sci-Fi City has them cheaper than other places. Trickster Sharks. Solid deck. Wasn't quite good enough to make it through. I have nothing terribly bad to say about the deck, and I think it could be a really exciting B-tier deck, assuming Sharks do not make A-. After I say that, let's take a look at Sharks. How is their bubble look? Elf Sharks technically would have been the 49th seed, except that Elf Sharks would have been 49th, qualifying without a Titan, so I bumped them up one spot into 48th and let them in. They need to win 1 or 2 games against MOE Grannies. Yeah, so this is like 2 bubble factions, and MOE Grannies is probably the better deck. Elf Sharks is better than 0-2 looks, because they had to play against the Exploring Avengers, who are the 1 seed for a reason. However, where is there another Sharks deck? There's Hydra Sharks. Hydra Sharks made it in nicely. Hydra Sharks were in this qualifier, yes, and made it in as a wild card. So Sharks did get a second deck in there with Hydra Sharks, and Hydra Sharks are doing well. I think if Hydra Sharks makes a deep run and Elf Sharks doesn't, you will have an argument that Sharks got screwed out of an A- rating by Elf Sharks, because while Elf Sharks may not make it out of round 1 on their own merits, the reason they won't have done it is because they had the worst pairing, and that's because they went 5-3 in Qualifier 1, maybe possibly because they didn't have their Titan yet. I think it's likely that if Sharks has its Titan back in Qualifier 1, Elf Sharks earns a better seed and doesn't have to play a nearly impossible opponent in the first round. Is that all we have for Sharks? Hydras... Yeah, notice like both of these Sharks are getting in on wild cards. They're down in the wild card seeds. Sharks are most likely an A- faction. It's just that they may not actually have that letter attached to them. Sumo Pirates, another chance to try Sumo. Sumo's definitely B. Polynesian Plants, again, yeah, I mentioned they got screwed. Trickster Sharks are good. Hydrates, Pirates and Hydra, I thought it seemed like an interesting idea. The main idea is you've got a lot more ways to get your first mates out, but I think making the first mates big is just a better way to abuse them. It's like Hydra is a good pivot if you maybe first pick Pirates and then your opponent takes a whole bunch of removal. You can take Hydra and have some anti-removal there, but it wasn't as good as I thought it might be. All right, so now Frozen. We're only seeing Frozen towards the end of round 3, and that's because there is no such thing as a really bad Frozen deck. Frozen is a good faction. Frozen definitely deserves to be an A-tier faction. Frozen Bears, Frozen Lion King went out in this round. A third Frozen deck went out in the final round. And then Grim Frozen Tales made it all the way through. And, right, Frozen Avengers did well enough. That's right. Frozen Avengers did well enough despite going 5-3 that they did get a wild card. It just wasn't a guaranteed wild card. Kung Fu Beauty and the Beast. Did I forget? I think Kung Fu plus Beauty and the Beast went 5-3, but their tiebreakers weren't good enough for them to make the championship field, right? Yeah. I basically said it was basically have strength of schedule needs to be greater than 1-to-1 ratio. That means the average opponent faced by this 5-3 deck has to have a winning record rather than a losing record. And Beast Fu was exactly equal, and that's why Kung Fu Beast did not make it. I had to think about that for a minute. But yeah, Frozen Avengers has made it into the championship with 2 decks, and what happened? Well, Frozen Avengers is 3-1, and where's the other Frozen deck? Grim Frozen Tales. There we go. Oh yeah, Grim Frozen Tales is seeded 35th. Where are they? And they also made it in at 2-2. So Frozen is definitely A tier. They have 2 decks that have made it through to round 2, which means they have qualified for A-. Now, about Frozen, I think their high end is closer to their average than for most factions. That is, it's hard to make a bad Frozen deck, but it might be a little bit hard to make a great Frozen deck as well. I think they are a carry faction in the way I define carry factions. I define carry factions as how much this deck wins doesn't depend so much on the second faction present. This carry faction is going to deliver its class of results, sort of whatever you pair it with. I define a support faction as how well this faction does really depends on not just which partner you pair it with, but how good their partner is. It's not just about synergy, it's about how strong a faction you pair them with, and that's how I call a support. Frozen is very much a carry by that definition. Next decks. Hydra Grannies didn't quite make it. It had some obvious synergy there, but it wasn't enough synergy. It wasn't enough as what MOE had, or the obviously big hero. And the reason MOE Grannies, I think, did better than other Grannies decks is because Grannies are still a non-interactive rush faction. And when you've got a rush game, MOE is quite interactive, but it also has a victory point game that sets its where, in order to score victory points, you set yourself back in power development by killing your own minions. Grannies has a lot of power and no real way to step back from base breaks and pull bases away from breaking. Well, using MOE actions gives you the opportunity to move bases away from breaking. It also gives you an option if you rushed early and got a bunch of points with Grannies, now you can make MOE overpowered and MOE can carry you to the finish line. And that gives them a lot of synergy. So both in terms that MOE is interactive and also in terms that Grannies can get you that early rush that get you to 4, 8, or 12 VP. Hydra doesn't have quite those synergies because Hydra is also kind of a solitaire faction. It's just pure rush. That with Hydra Wizards, your pure rush is nasty enough to dominate in this tier. With Hydra Grannies, it's not quite good enough. Fairy Tea and the Beast, Beauty and the Beast, Fairy Tea, they're both good enough factions. They didn't do enough. What I'm finding with Beauty and the Beast is Beauty and the Beast decks that do not run mages or sumo or some other way to discard cards outside of Beauty and the Beast's own ability to do so end up being inconsistent, because you have to line up the cards you want to discard with the cards that help you discard them. And so that's why Beauty and the Beast is not just crazy overpowered on its own. It needs the right partner to gain consistency. But it's good enough when it works that if you give it consistency with mages, that's when it becomes crazy overpowered. Steampunk Ralph, obviously anything that works with a bunch of base actions has to be tried with Steampunk. This version did not really do enough. Wreck-It Ralph is not A. Beauty and the Beast, Big Hero. Again, the problem here is Big Hero plus Beauty and the Beast having inconsistency if you don't give them ways to discard. Like, Beauty and the Beast plus Aladdin has a little more synergy, but in the end, Jasmine and the Beast only went 5 and 3. So it's a good deck, but not necessarily a great deck in this tier. And Beauty and the Hero doesn't have that synergy, and on top of that, Aladdin probably is a better faction than Big Hero. Big Fairy was already eliminated last round, and I just need another deck to fill it out. Alright, so now we go to the end. Grim Frozen Tales had already punched its ticket to the championship, and then Big Hero Grannies came over the top and beat them, but that's okay, they were still in. Frozen Avengers made it in on a wild card. This is obviously just bruiser on bruiser action, and I play bruiser well, so we expect that Frozen Avengers, piloted by me when I'm on both sides of the game, is probably going to overperform how it would in someone else's games. It's still a good deck. Frozen is just so resistant to removal. It has so much card advantage from the main characters searching for each other. They do that. That also, they have a ton of deck thinning, and that means that with Frozen Avengers, you have a big power minion deck that just consistently draws what it needs, and it's got plenty of utility baked into the Avengers minions that you don't even need to get a lot of utility with your actions. Kung Fu plus Beauty and the Beast. Maybe this deck, I mean, if Sifu is leaked earlier, this deck is almost certainly in the championship. Kung Fu Knights. Yeah, actually, they were close in both games against MOE Grannies. MOE Grannies made the championship, probably with Sifu. Kung Fu Knights also, like, with Sifu and not being trapped in the same overfilled qualifier, Kung Fu Knights are probably another deck that deserves to make the championships, if they had Sifu. Nightmare Before Christmas, Fairy's Tea, Grim Avengers, again, they drew their way to 5 and 3 and not enough. Lion Kitties, I've talked about how, like, this has a potential to be a top deck in B tier. Polynesian plus Mulan, there's some definite synergy here, mostly with Mulan loving power counters. And, yeah, it's a good deck. The individual factions, Polynesian and Mulan aren't A tier to me. And Avenging Grannies, I already talked about how they have negative synergy. They made it in, they were on we have an odd number of factions in this round. They probably had the best tiebreakers of any 3 and 3 deck, so they got to play another round. And they got brutalized by Hydra Sharks in the process. So that is Qualifier 8. Oh, yeah. And the overall winner was Vigilante Knights. They are really, really good. I believe I think I streamed one of their games, and they rolled on the streamed match. The big thing about Vigilante Knights is that Vigilantes and Knights both have a bunch of cards that rely on 4 power. It's similar to how Grannies work really well with Big Hero, because the Grannies Titan mentions 3 power. Well, Vigilante has card draw that mentions 4 power minions. Knights have the Grail, which getting the Grail off is really key in 1v1, which mentions 4 power minions, and so each of them makes the other's 4 power shtick more consistent. On top of that, like, Vigilante has some fun minions to play around with, too. So this is a deck where it's very much like Beauty and the Beast plus Mages, except it's probably not quite that broken. It plays a slower game, but it's still very, very good. So with that said, I have talked for almost 30 minutes about Qualifier 8 because this field was so gargantuan, and also because I had to go look up a few things. Let's start about the championship. So what's going on in Class A Championship? And this is where I have to remind myself that that is almost exactly at 30 minutes where I start talking about the championship, so I can put in a timestamp. Well, Round 1A, I have finished the entire round of, and this is the only round that is not eliminating decks. To make Round 2, a deck needs to get 2 wins before it gets 3 losses. All the decks in green won their Round 1A matches and go straight to Round 2A without having to play Round 1B. The decks that draw or lose go to Round 1B. Round 1A, it's first v last and middle v middle. Same for 2A, 3A, etc. 1B is first v middle and middle v last. Every B round will be played this way too, and that helps me avoid... That helps me minimize the number of matches that I'm going to have to repair in order to avoid repeats. So what are some of the... and the other thing is for tiering, either winning one game or making Round 2A is going to be a requirement for an A- rating, and at least 2 decks involving a faction have to make that qualification for the faction to get a rating. My suspicion is that making Round 3 probably earns A, and making Round 4 probably earns A+. Exactly where decks have to finish will depend on like how large this makes each tier. I want to make the tiers pretty comparable in size, but like A- should be maybe a little bigger than A, which should be a little bigger than A+. So I'm going to be a little flexible with exactly what the cutoff is for A and A+ in order to keep them at an aesthetic looking size. All right, let's talk about results. Exploring Avengers, we expected this. They are the highest rated deck in the field in 2021. Data, filter views, visual sort. And in the 2021 overall championship that allowed all of the factions, like, let's see. They're way below where I thought they were. Yeah, they finished 11th. Shield Kree finished 12th, and that's why Shield Kree was seeded 3rd. And Hydra Wizards finished 20th, which is still very respectable given the crazy strength of this tournament that I ran last. Oh, and in 23rd, here's Steampunk Incas. What else do we have? Mad Scientist Pirates finished in 27th, which is, again, really good for an A-class deck. And Mad Scientist gained a Titan since then, which, by the way, Bride is both quite good and it plays well with other Titans. I haven't gotten a chance to play it as its only Titan because I'm in the middle of the A-Class Championship, but both Mad Scientist Pirates and Mad Scientist Werewolves are making good use of the Bride. And I think overall in 6 games played by the Bride, I think the Bride has turned 2 losses into wins. And then we have some other decks that didn't do as well, didn't make the first cut here, like Fairy Dragons, Pirate Rockstar. Wait, Pirate Rockstars isn't Class A, because Rockstars are S. Kung Fu Fairies, you can see, played, got 2 wins out of 6. So there's a few other decks, and, you know, the 1 and 5 decks, that's not proving anything. But, wrong tab, Exploring Avengers, Wizard, Hydra, Shield Kree all proved themselves and earned their top seeds in S tier. So even though their factions didn't get S tier rankings, as decks, these are S tier level decks. Except, wait a minute, what's going on with this? Shield Kree is in red here. So let's talk Shield Kree a bit, because they are the highest seeded faction to get knocked out of this tournament in the first round. Shield Kree is fantastic when it draws good. It can keep up on an average or better draw. It can keep up with S-tier competition. The problem is it doesn't have a heck of a lot of interaction with the opposing deck, and when it doesn't draw the cards in the right order, it doesn't have an alternative plan. And they had a bit of a matchup problem here because their only real interaction consists of a couple cards that can, they can destroy a 3-power minion, blow up an action, something like that. They don't have a lot of interaction. Zombie Critters doesn't care about kill a 3-power minion. Madware Scientists is happy to put... Madware Scientist was able to do nasty things with Moontouched because Shield Cree's answer to Moontouched on a 4-power or larger minion pretty much consists of break the base out from under it, and if Shield Cree doesn't have a great draw, they can't break the base out from under that minion fast enough, and that was really how they got eliminated. They got eliminated by Moontouch sticking in play too long from a good opposing deck. But the thing to realize is they're very close to being a solitaire deck that doesn't interact with the opponent's cards. They're a little bit inconsistent, so while Shield Cree can hang with any deck, it can also lose to almost any opposing deck as well, and that's how it ended up going 6-4 in Class S and 1-3 in Class A. Orc Warriors, outdated, lost 3 games. They did come back to take a game from Mad Scientist Pirates, but since Shield Cree is also 1-3, even if an odd number of decks make it to round 2, Shield Cree rather than Orc Warriors will be getting the lifeline. On top of that, Orc Warriors really do not like playing against Explorers. You can notice they were reasonably close to winning game 1 here, but my recollection is it wasn't as close as the score indicates. I didn't really see a lucky draw that could have led to Orc Warriors winning that game. They don't like opponents being too good at moving stuff around because their defense consists of jamming everything up with monsters. Explorers deal with that really well, and in the second round, again, Mad Scientist Pirates, Orc Warriors don't have the right kind of removal. Their defense is the wrong kind of defense to stop a big first mate. Like, they've got Death Breath to get rid of one, and that's about it. Mad Scientist Pirates have other tricks besides just making one big first mate. On top of that, having all of those monsters present means that at some point Buccaneer Powder Keg might just draw a lot of treasures. In general, Orc Warriors are a good deck. Orc Warriors are a deck that can dominate A tier. The thing is, when I say A tier, I don't mean the letter A capitalized. I mean it lowercase. Back when they were relatively new, they would have been one of the strongest decks in A tier. Neither Orc nor Warriors are an A tier faction at this point. It's possible that they'll be a great deck in B tier. They're a great deck in some tier. They're a great deck in whatever tier Orcs and Warriors sit in, but it ain't A. Ninja Zombies rolled, 8 Pirates. This is still a counter matchup. On top of that, Ninjas are getting a new Titan to make this even better. I think Invisible Ninja plays quite well with Zombies. So Ninja Zombies has always been one of the most synergistic Ninja decks in my opinion. It gets, if anything, it gets more so having a Titan now. And Ninja Knights also, hey, it'll use Invisible Ninja. Frozen Avengers was that wild card that barely got in from Qualifier 8. Astro Dragons used to be a better deck than it is nowadays, although again, like, relative to what tier Astro Knights would be nowadays, it's still a good deck. But, oh my god. Did I goof up? Yes, I goofed up. I'm not repairing this, but Astro Dragons got screwed. They played 4 games against the same opponent. Any case, Frozen Avengers won the series 3-1. I did not catch that. Astro Dragons wasn't making a deep run anyway. Astro Knights was not, in general, making a deep run anyway. So at least I think it's a relatively harmless mistake. Ninja Knights, they're good. Kitty Princesses, they had one of the best deck ratings among an A-tier deck before I ran the qualifiers. Their kitties are kind of out of date and they aren't as good as they were, and kitties are probably, they're a B tier faction nowadays. Because a lot of stuff just beats them up. A lot of stuff doesn't care about their ways of trying to get an artificial base solo by stealing everything. And what happened to them in the second round? They actually managed to draw with the Steampunk Incas. Yeah, you might be about to see a fun picture showing up on the screen right now, which is what Steampunk Incas looked like at the end of that first game against Kitty Princesses. I have not previously managed to pull this combo off, but what happened was they copied Workshop's base ability with Sign of the Stars, and then used... Why am I blanking on the name of their main card? Temple of the Sun. Used Temple of the Sun to set it up so that every action they played on that base drew them a card and gave them an extra action. When you get this combo set up, what you do is you play as many actions on that base as you do, and you hope that you get your hands on Golden Condor. If you get your hands on Golden Condor, you can then return all your actions to your hand, replay them, draw even more cards, get a whole ton of extra actions, and then you can start playing actions in more different places. And because Steampunk is your second faction, you can use Scrap Diving to get your Golden Condor back, play it again. Meanwhile, you're also getting power counters on your minions from Fortress Walls, so you can repeat this a couple times, maybe draw your deck, draw it again in there. Once you get this running with the 3 critical cards of Workshop, Temple of the Sun, and Golden Condor, you should be able to, in many cases, draw your deck and break all 3 bases in play, which is what happened, and the score went from 4-2 to 15-7 in one big turn, and with that, Kitty Princesses were out of the tournament at 0-3. Nevertheless, they've got tricks, they've got 2 very nice specials, and Kitty Princesses actually got their 1 win in Class A Championship off of soloing the first 5 3-point base with a really early Can-Has cheeseburger paired with a Snow White moving over another princess for a burst, and that let them get a 5-0 lead at the start of the game, which then they just spent the rest of the game defending by trying to trade off bases, just make sure that stuff broke before the game ended, and they managed to get to 15 before the Steampunk Incas had a chance to catch up. Next decks, Exploring Troopers. Yeah, they're not as good as they used to be. They got a win, but they're good. They maybe deserved to be in this tournament, but they don't deserve to be past the first round of it. I don't think they got unlucky, really. Hydra Sharks is a better deck. Zombie Dragons, they didn't exactly roll, but they beat a pretty good opponent. Yeah. Alright, next thing to talk about is the 0-2 decks collectively. 8 of them have played, and so far none of these 8 have made it to 2-2. I'm not sure if this streak is going to continue, but I think it's a little bit of a statistical anomaly. The 0-2 decks are not that much worse than the 1-1 decks, that none of them out of 8 should have gotten a 2-0 result yet, but yeah. None of the 0-2 decks have actually made it out of being 0-2. With that said, Itty Grims, Aladdin Knights, Sinister Werewolves, and actually possibly Elf Sharks, now that they have their Titan, are better 0-2 decks than the ones that I've actually played so far. What else do we have that was interesting? I think maybe it's more interesting to talk about decks as they get eliminated than try to talk about every deck right now. I talked about Shield Kree and how they got knocked out Astro Dragons. I've talked about all of these. Werewolf Mounties. Werewolf Mounties is a fan favorite, I think. They're a good deck. They earned their spot here, but they're not as good as the other decks in this tournament, mostly because if they don't have the right pieces already in play, often Northern Mover is kind of necessary to get them to really work at their best level. If they don't have the stuff already in play, if they don't have the right combo cards out there, they don't actually do all that much with half a combo. And Class A decks are good enough to take advantage of this, and that's really why they went down. Exploring Princesses, again, they are very similar to Exploring Avengers, but on the average, the Princesses do less with their talents or come into play abilities than Avengers do. They have less of an impact than Avengers when they come into play, and that makes them a little less synergistic with Explorers, as well as the fact that I think overall Avengers are just a slightly better faction than Princesses. So they were good enough to make the field, they were not good enough to make the second round. Werewolf Changers, they're good. Really, they drew Ignoble Elves. They're good enough to be here. Where are they? They played Inca Dragons. Yeah. Inca Dragons got destroyed in S, but Inca Dragons is still a good deck, and they're a good enough deck that Werewolf Changers was not able to keep up with them. And that's really... this is really where Werewolf Changers got eliminated, because they hung with Ignoble Elves, but they could not hang with Inca Dragons. That felt very much like Inca Dragons was the better deck. Inca Dragons has a big Peter Principle problem. Problem is, Werewolf Changers is below their level of incompetence. 8 Pirates. Yeah, 15 to 25 is a genuine final score. And that was just the point where the Pirates ran out of bases with a breakpoint of 22 or lower, and they stopped breaking bases. They went off once. They managed to go off once in 4 games. Now, they didn't go off against the Ninja Zombies, although they almost saved that second game. They didn't go off against the Ninja Zombies because the Ninja Zombies counter them. Ninjas counter 8 Pirates pretty well. Against Masters of Evil Werewolves, they were able to do it once, but they needed to do it twice after that loss to Ninja Zombies, and so they earned their spot here, but they weren't good enough to make it out of this round. Astronite Kitties. This, they almost, they lost to Wizard Hydra, which is an extremely strong deck. And they kept it looking like it looked almost competitive, but not quite. Wizard Hydra was clearly just faster. Second round, they win the first game against Grim Frozen Tales in a very close game. In the second game, that is a 2016 result, which was 16 to 16, go to overtime, and Grim Frozen Tales just barely gets in fast enough to win that game. Astro Kitties almost made the second round. They were a hair's breadth away from doing it. And so actually, Astro Knights almost made it into round 2A. But I think Astro Knights are a B. I think Astro Knights are a B faction. And Astro Kitties is probably a very strong B deck. I am still embarrassed I did not catch. And you know the reason I didn't catch this is because I was staring at something else. I was looking for mirror matches that was something like Avengers versus Avengers. I just missed this repeat match. So that's everyone who's been eliminated so far in the Class A Championships. I want to get a few more streamed games in, but I don't promise I'm not going to get distracted by practicing my violin longer, possibly making another automaton video where I'm playing a Paganini Caprice and alternating between violin and automatons. I might end up doing that. I might just end up spending a bit more time doing a lot more stuff than I have been in previous months, so I may get distracted, but I am going to try to keep this tournament going and come up with some possibly really long summaries of what's going on. But I don't think the next summary is going to be as long as this one was, because I had a ton of stuff to cover this time. It's really a round and a half of championship plus one very bloated qualifier. So on that note, I'm going to stop talking, and I'm going to hopefully make it less time before the next video than the time between the last video and this one. Happy smashing, everyone!